Revelation chapter 2, starting in verse 12. To the angel of the church in Pergamum write, these are the words of him who has the sharp, double-edged sword. I know where you live, where Satan has his throne. Yet you remain true to my name. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness, who was put to death in your city, where Satan lives. Nevertheless, I have a few things against you. There are some among you who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to entice the Israelites to sin, so that they ate food sacrificed to idols and committed sexual immorality. Likewise, you also have those who hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent, therefore. Otherwise, I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. This is the word of the Lord. You know, I've noticed it is almost always a mistake to imagine that we fully understand another person and their life. I probably learned this, our family, we were missionaries in Asia for a long time. And that just meant that I knew that the life we had lived was very different and the experiences that we'd had were very, very strange. And that meant that when I could tell when someone was talking to us that they had no idea kind of what our life was like, or sometimes they had no interest in what our life had been like. And so that's a pretty extreme example, living in another country for a long time. But one of the things I've learned from that is that almost all of us are a mystery to other people. It's almost always a mistake to imagine that we fully grasp other people's lives. So, and remember that, too. It's an important lesson. If you're a teacher and you got kids in your class and you can't understand why they don't behave, remember, it's probably a mistake to think that you fully understand what's going on in those kids' lives. Remember that about all the people that you interact with regularly. Parents, remember that about your kids. You're not fully grasping what it's like to be them. And kids, remember, you're not fully grasping what it's like to be your parents. And now the problem is that means all of us can sometimes feel like we're an island. Okay? It's like, that's not just some of us. All of us quite often feel like nobody really understands me, my life, what I've experienced, what I've been through, where I'm at in my life. No one really understands. What does this lead to? It leads to feelings of loneliness. It leads to feeling of defensive. You get defensive about, what's going on in your life. It leads to confusion because you feel like who can help me? Who can help me, tell me, give me good guidance, because nobody really understands what's going on in my life. It also leads to this unhealthy comparison, right? We're always comparing ourselves. Sometimes we forget that other people's lives are different than ours. We're comparing ourselves to them. We're measuring ourselves by them. We're seeing how we perform compared to them. It's almost always a mistake. And we saw last week that there's 7 letters to 7 churches, and that should be great comfort to us. Because what that tells us is Christian experience is not one size fits all, uniform, everybody goes through the same thing. You read these 7 letters, you find that the different churches had different victories, they had different challenges, they had different failures. And of course, the number 7, we said, that's not an accident. The reason there's 7 churches is in the book like Revelation, where all the numbers in Revelation have some kind of a significance or a symbolism to them. 7 is like this number of completion in the book of Revelation. So to have 7 churches is the way to say, it doesn't matter when you're a Christian or where you're a Christian, you'll be able to find yourself in these letters. You'll be able to find it. Now, I should mention here, just in passing, some of us maybe grew up and were exposed to this idea that maybe the 7 churches represent 7 ages in church history. And I'll just say, you got to do a lot of twisting and squeezing to make that work. It doesn't really work. And the way it's kind of suspect is that anytime anybody gives you that, they draw a chart and they say, you see, 7 ages of the church. Where does the chart always end? Now. And people have been doing that forever. The chart always ends now. So it's very convenient. There's 7 ages of church history. We just happen to be living in the final one, right? And the other thing, honestly, is that's kind of the privilege of the Western perspective. We generally tend to read the 7 ages of church history in terms of the English-speaking church. Doesn't make as much sense if you're talking about the Chinese church or the African church. It doesn't fit nearly as well. Anyway, that's just an aside, because that may be something that some of us have been exposed to in the past. So there's 7 churches. They're in a different, they're all experiencing different things, but what do they have in common? What they have in common is their Lord, the one who walks among the lampstands. And we saw a couple weeks ago that Jesus is almost like a priest as he walks among the lampstands. Of course, if you're a Jewish person reading this, you have an image in your mind, right? You've seen people dressed like priests in a temple with golden lampstands. Like, you've seen that before. You know what that is. So to have Jesus dressed like a priest walking among the lampstands tells us we are in the presence of God. And friend, this is an amazing an encouragement to us as Christians to know that when you're in the church, when you belong to the people of Jesus, you are living in the presence of God. And Jesus is the one who is in charge of making sure that the presence of God stays here. So again, the idea of why is a church like a lampstand? Like, why would that be the symbol? Church equals lampstand. Do we look like a lampstand? No, we don't. But the idea is the light is the light of the glorious presence of God. And that's what a church is. We're the people who bask in the light of God's presence. And who keeps the lights on? Jesus keeps the lights on. In the temple, it was the priest's job to make sure the lamps stayed lit. The light stayed on. Who makes sure that the church stays churchy? Make sure that the church stays the focal point of the presence of the glorious God. That's the Lord Jesus Christ who does this. So Jesus oversees his church to make sure the light stays on. He's in charge of the light mission. And let me tell you this, it's not just churches. Remember last week, we're going to talk about this a couple times today. Remember last week we saw there was kind of this unexpected individual emphasis in the letters. He that has ears to hear. So it's not just a call to the church to respond. Hey, pastors, let's steer this church in a different direction. No. It's a message to every person sitting in the church. Individually, you've got ears to hear. You need to hear. I individually need to hear and to respond. And that means what? You're the church. You're a light burning. And Jesus is taking charge to make sure that you stay burning. I don't know where you work or where you teach or what your life is like, but there's very often you'll find yourself as the Christian in the room. I'm going to guess for most of us, we are regularly in a room where we are the Christian in the room. What's going on there? Jesus will make sure that you stay burning as his light in that place. He's taking charge of that to make sure that happens. He'll trim you and make sure that he keeps the lights on there where you're at. Now, the whole book is going to do this. Again, the whole book of Revelation is to make sure the lights stay on. It's to make sure a church stays churchy. To make sure the lights stay lit. To make sure Christians stay like Christians. To make sure you stay like a Christian. It's to open up our ears. It's to wake us up, to snap us out of the haze that the world puts us in. And the book is, one of the things the book is doing is pulling back the curtain on this spiritual war that's going on. It's like we look at the world and we don't see the real picture. We don't see the spiritual reality of what's going on, right? This is something we're going to talk about again and again in the book of Revelation. We look at the world and we see world events, economic trends, social trends, right? What's trending? That's what we see. We're seeing it at this mundane level. What the book of Revelation does is it pulls the curtain back and shows you what's going on in the background. Do you think all this stuff is just accidents? That all of it's totally separate from the spiritual world? No, it's not. No, look at even here in these letters. Notice who is each letter addressed to? It's not addressed to the pastor of the church. It's not addressed even to the church. The letters are written to the angels of the church. That's a very strange thing. We never thought of King's Church having an angel before, or the Church of Pergamum probably never thought of themselves as having an angel. But it's important to realize this is a spiritual organization, right? We're not just some social club. We are a spiritual organization. There's something spiritual going on when people gather in the name of Jesus Christ. That means angels are involved. It's possible for us as Christians to see the world in an unreal way. And like I said, if you look at the world and all you see is politics and finances and economics and the internet, if that's all you see, you're not seeing the world as it really is. And so he sends this letter to the angel. Now, why would that be? Why would he send the letter to the angel? I think it's a way of saying, like, there's spiritual things going on in our church that we have very little understanding of. And Jesus is in charge of those spiritual things. And he uses angels to protect and to serve his people. That's always been going on. You read the Old Testament, angels were dispatched to protect and serve the people of God. And that's still going on, even though we have very little awareness or understanding. But it's a reminder that our battle that we're facing is a spiritual battle. And those angels need marching orders the same way that you and I do. So when Jesus sends this message to say, hey, church, this is the stuff I want you to be working on, he sends a letter to the angel saying the angel's going to help you with that. The angel knows what your job is, and the angel's going to work to make sure that it happens. You know, a lot of times in our churches we get security teams, which is a good thing, right? Because we face physical threats. So we say, you know what, it's a good idea for our church to be prepared, have some guys who are armed and ready to defend our church and who are keeping their eyes open. But it's important to remember that our church has a spiritual security team too. An angelic security team. We are protected by the angels of the Lord. The church is a spiritual reality. And let's be honest, we don't really understand everything the angels can do. It's something the Bible it's a little mysterious. But here, let me give you some examples of things that we know about angels just from reading the Bible. We know that angels exercise power over men and their minds, over creation, and over spiritual evil, over demons. Do you know that angels can interact or interface with those three things? They can interact with human beings, with creation, the physical universe, and they can interact with spiritual powers, with demons. And we need angels working in all those areas. We need them working in those areas, and we can be confident that Jesus has equipped us with spiritual power. And that means Jesus has provided all the power that we need to continue to be faithful to him. Never believe, friend, that you lack the power to be faithful to Jesus. How often do we think that? We cave, or there's some kind of pressure on us for being a Christian, and we cave because we think, I don't have the power to be faithful to Christ in this situation. Oh, but you do. There's a letter sent to the angel. The church wants you to know there's angels standing by ready to defend and to help and to equip you. Angels are a reminder of the enormous resources that God has allocated for our help and for our benefit. So you got enemies that are threatening you. Angels are standing by. You're lost. You don't know what you need to do right now. You lack insight. Angels are standing by. You have some needs that need to be met, like our church has some needs that need to be met. You don't know where the help is going to come from. Angels are standing by. We need to find grace in the eyes of other people. You know, sometimes in your life, your whole life is hanging on whether you find grace in the eyes of whether a person shows favor to you or not. And we're blind to the reality. We just think, well, I just hope this person is nice to me today. I hope I find grace, find favor in this person's eyes. Like, don't you know? There's somebody who has power over such things, right? So, there's angels standing by ready to help and to defend the people of God. So, we see with Jesus, he starts off his letter and he says, I know. Now, we're used, in most of the other letters, like we saw last week, what does Jesus say? I know your deeds. But here at Pergamum, he says it a little different. I know where you live. I know where you live. What does this mean? He has a perfect understanding of you, of your life, and your situation. How often do you just get frustrated talking to somebody like, you could never understand? You don't understand. You don't understand. Either you don't want to understand or you can't understand. I can't make you understand. But when you're talking to Jesus, you're talking to somebody who has complete understanding of your life, of your difficulties, and your situation. He knows about the areas of difficulty where you live, and he is involved. So, for example, where do you live? Let's think about that for a little bit before we move into some applications from this passage. Where do you live? In other words, what are the circumstances that you're living in that make it particularly challenging for you to be faithful to Jesus Christ? He knows. He knows where you live. He knows about the twisted, unhealthy culture that you live in. About all the pressures of the world, the way it's trying to squeeze you into a sick mold. He knows about that. He is completely aware of what's going on in our culture. He knows about your debilitating, crippling health problems, your chronic pain, your difficulty in trying to get medical answers. He knows about that. He knows, perfect understanding. He understands about the friction that you experience in complicated relationships in your life. He knows. Not a relational problem in your life that he doesn't fully understand what's going on. Your disappointment with your fellow Christians and how they let you down. He knows. Your parent, you're dealing with lonely, hurting, rebellious, sick children. He knows. He says, I know where you live. I know exactly what's going on in your situation. So that's what Jesus says. He is aware and he's involved. Now, specifically what he says here, I know where you live, verse 13, where Satan has his throne. Now, all the church is tangled with Satan. All the church has dealt with satanic attack. But there was something extra difficult about living at Pergamum. It is true, Jesus does not give the same battles to every Christian. Some Christians will face attacks from the devil that other Christians will be blissfully unaware of their whole life. So remember that. Don't be careful assuming that you totally understand what's going on in other Christians' life. You might not. They might be dealing with stuff that you have very little understanding of, right? So it's very powerful here. Now, we're not really sure. He says Satan has his throne in Pergamum. Commentators have different opinions about this. Pergamum was a city where emperor worship was a very prominent thing. They had a major temple for Zeus. I sent a picture in the weekly update. Had a picture. It's in the museum in Germany now. But there was this thing that was like a throne. It was like the throne of Zeus. And that was potentially what he means by Satan having his throne. Whatever it is, it's clearly some kind of pagan, demonic pressure on these Christians. And he says, I know it's not the same living in Pergamum as it is living in Ephesus. Sure, there's challenges living in Ephesus, but not like Pergamum. And Jesus says, I know where you live. So let me give you 3 little applications that we should take away from this. When Jesus says to you, I know exactly what's going on in your life. Number 1, encouragement. This gives us encouragement. Jesus says, I know what you're going through, and I care. Many don't know. Many don't even care to know, but I know. I'm the king of creation, and I am aware of you. And one of the most painful things you can experience is talking to a truly self-absorbed person. Right? When you're talking to a person that just talks on and on and on about themselves, what's going on in their life, and you realize they have absolutely zero interest in you and what's going on in your life. Is that what it's like to talk to Jesus? No, it's not. He says, I know what's going on. Let's talk about what's going on there where you live. He knows he's given them some unusually tough challenges. And like you said, not every path is the same. He gives some Christians, some of his disciples, harder assignments for his glory and for their delight. Never forget that. If he's given you an unusually hard assignment, it's for your good. Okay? It's good to live in Pergamum. It's good to be a Christian in Pergamum. You probably won't choose it. Probably wouldn't choose to be a Christian in Pergamum. You'd probably move out if you got a chance. But if God put you in Pergamum, it's good to be a Christian there in those circumstances. This is what we have to believe about where we're at. It is good for you to be a Christian in the circumstances that you're in right now. It's good. He claims ownership over their church. I love this part. Notice he says there was clearly a member of their church who had been killed. This is how bad things had gotten in Pergamum. A member of their church had been killed. Verse 13. You did not renounce your faith in me, not even in the days of Antipas, my faithful witness who was put to death in your city. Now, they probably thought of Antipas as their Antipas. But Jesus says, no, he's my Antipas, my faithful witness. He claims ownership over Antipas. He was his martyr, and Jesus says, I allowed him to go through that. I allowed Antipas to meet this fate. He says, I know your faithfulness. I have not missed it, and it will be rewarded. So he knows how hard it is for you. There's no challenge, there's no difficulty that you're facing, Christian, that he's not perfectly aware of. It's something that he's measured out to you. And good news, he's not comparing you to somebody else. He knows the challenges that he's given to you. So Jesus says something like this to us. He says, I know that I've given you some tough challenges. I know how little you have to encourage you. I know what it's cost you to be faithful thus far. I haven't missed any of it. I won't miss any of it. I will not let it be too much for you. I will give you just what you need, just when you need it. I will reward you for your faithfulness through these exceptional circumstances. That's what he says to the Christians at Pergamum, and it's what he says to us as well. So the first thing we get is encouragement. So, friend, why would you waste your time comparing yourself to somebody else? Why would you waste your time doing that? He's not comparing you to anyone else. And why would you indulge in self-pity and feel bad for yourself because you live in Pergamum? Or because Jesus has sent you some exceptionally difficult challenges this year? Feel bad for yourself about that. That's something that Jesus has given to you. You say, well, I wish he hadn't given it to me. Well, he gave it to you. It's for his glory, and it is for your good. So take encouragement from that he knows where you live. Second, there's a warning built into this. There's a warning built into this. I know where I put you, Jesus says, so there's no excuses. Don't come to Jesus and say, Jesus, you don't understand. You don't understand how hard it is to be faithful to you where I live. Jesus says, oh, but I do understand. And there's no excuse to not be faithful to him. We might expect Jesus to say something like this. Oh, I know y'all live in Pergamum. So, fine. Just do whatever you got to do to survive. No, Jesus actually says, he says, verse 14, nevertheless, I have a few things against you, he says. I know you live in Pergamum. I know it's difficult, but I'm still expecting you to be faithful to me as your Lord there in that place. Now, Jesus mentions these few things that he has against them, as he did in Ephesus as well. Is this Jesus, like we talked about last week, is this just Jesus being petty or nitpicky? No. We must remember our good works never put God in our debt. Remember that. You can serve God your whole life faithfully, day in, day out. Serve him without wavering your whole life. At the end of all of that, you serve God 40 years without wavering. Does God owe you anything at the end of that? No. God is never in our debt. When we have done all that, then we've only done what was right and natural and good for a human being to do. We haven't, moved the stakes a bit so that God now owes us. Never. So clearly, what's going on in this church? Some among them have capitulated to idolatry and sexual immorality. Let me say something else about that last idea there about God never being in our debt. I've been a missionary before. And missionaries are as susceptible to this as anybody. Because there's these very easy to see sacrifices. I'll be clear. All Christians who are following Jesus have made some sacrifices. There's always a cross. There's always a price to pay to following Jesus. But when you're a missionary, there's some very obvious things, right? And that can lead some missionaries to start to feel like I've got a pass from Jesus to basically be a kind of a not very faithful Christian. It's possible to stay a missionary and to stop being a faithful Christian. It's possible to stay a pastor and to stop being a faithful Christian. It's possible to continue being a church member and to stop being a faithful Christian. It's possible to continue on being a good dad, a good husband, good wife, good mom, and to stop being a faithful Christian, right? So look at what they're actually compromising in. They clearly are compromising. We won't dig too much into the details in verse 14, but there's some kind of problem with sexual immorality and idolatry. And we're going to see these twin challenges repeatedly in the book of Revelation. This is a problem with these churches. And guess what? It's not just them. It's still going on today. These are the two twin perennial challenges and temptations to the church. Sexual immorality and idolatry. This is always going on. Now, why does idolatry? Clearly there was, in Pergamum, the church's refusal to worship idols led to some persecution. And that's always going to happen. People don't like it when you won't bow down to their gods. If you won't swear pledge allegiance to their god and their idol, it will make people very upset. Why? Because you're essentially saying that their god is fake. It's not real, right? So again, that's why we see certain things. There are certain words today in our society you can't say. There are certain things that are blasphemy to say in 2024. Why? Because they're attacking the gods. You want to know what the gods are in your society? Just ask, what am I not allowed to say? That's what it is. There's the gods right there. That's what everyone is worshiping in your society. So there's idolaters hate to have their lies exposed. And Christians, you want to know, might be careful about this when we talk about idolatry. I don't know why, but I think people like us have been particularly susceptible to this misunderstanding, where we think anything that we love is probably idolatry. You love your mom and dad? That's probably idolatry. You love your kids? That's probably idolatry. You love your job? That's probably idolatry. You like football? Probably idolatry. It's like, no. It is good to love good things. Let's get straight. Let's get this straight. It is good to love good things. And God has filled this world with good things. When does it become idolatry? Or when do you need to worry about idolatry? Okay? You need to worry about idolatry when you are tempted to be unfaithful to Jesus. That's when your idolatry bells need to start going off. Where you are being tempted to be unfaithful to Jesus. See, a lot of Christians are unhelpful. Like, I love my kids. Maybe I love my kids too much. I love my wife. Maybe I love my wife too much. You really don't have to spend any time worrying about that. You need to worry about is being faithful to Jesus Christ. And the second, that my love for my wife leads me to be unfaithful to Jesus Christ, that's where a line has been crossed. Where my love for my country has led me to be unfaithful to Jesus Christ, that's when a line has been crossed. So that's idolatry. Now, then he talks about sexual immorality here, which is another danger of the church of Pergamum, and a danger for us and our churches in 2024. What's going on there? I'm going to say this real quickly, and we'll just move on. A lot of people wonder, why is this like a hang-up for the Bible? Unbelievers think this. If you have friends that aren't Christians, to them one of the strangest things about the Bible is it seems so prudish because it's always talking about sexual immorality. People are, why are you Christians? You're always talking about sexual immorality. There's a reason. There's a reason, right? And some Christians have said very unhelpful things about this. So they try to make it well, really all sin is equal. Clearly not. Clearly not. Okay? The reason the Bible is so chock full of warnings about sexual immorality is because it will destroy you like few things will. It is not an equal danger to a bunch of other sins. Okay? You're playing with a fire that will destroy you. Okay? So this is why it comes up over and over again in the Bible. And one of the ways to say this is, if you won't devote yourself to God, if you won't devote what the Bible calls our vessel or our body that God has made, if we won't devote our lives to God, you won't keep it. So some people think, I'm not going to worship God. Instead, I'm going to keep my body and keep my life for whatever I want to keep it for. But you've made a grave miscalculation. If you don't devote your vessel to God, you won't keep it either. You will lose it. And that's the secret of what's going on in sexual immorality. What is it? It is people losing their vessel. It's losing themselves. They are lost. They've held themselves back from God and they've lost themselves. So, what does he say here? Repent, verse 16. Now that tells us that there's people in the church that have already begun to dabble. They've already begun to compromise in this area. He says, you've got to repent. Otherwise, I will soon come to you and will fight against them with the sword of my mouth. We talked about that sword back in chapter 1. And we said this represents the power of a judge with authority to pass judgment and to cut down wrongdoers, evildoers. But Jesus says, I'll come to the church and I will punish. Now, if you notice these letters, we're not going to talk about this too much today, but if you look through these 7 letters, almost every one of them, Jesus says, I will come, I will come, I will come. Is that talking about his final end time coming when Jesus is going to come once and for all and bring this whole thing to a close? No, I don't think so. This is Jesus saying, I'm going to come pay your church a visit. So Jesus is coming once and for all at the end of time. But before then, he's coming and visiting his churches. We should not think that because Jesus is ascended and glorified in heaven, that he's like checked out and he's not involved at all in the church right now. Not true. He pays his churches a visit to make sure the lights stay on. And he says, I got a sword, and I use the sword to make sure the light stays on. And sometimes the way I make the light stay on is I cut away some people that don't belong in the church anymore. So don't forget his sword. It is ready to cut away the faker, the poser. In other words, the judgments of this book will be set loose. It's coming up real soon. Chapter 4, chapter 5. Chapter 6 starts like the judgment train. And we're not going to stop for a long time. And basically, when he talks about this sword, you should be thinking about all that stuff that's about to be unleashed, whatever the word is. later on. All those things that are about to break loose on the world, that's what Jesus is saying. That's what's going to come to these folks in the church unless they repent. So, it's a warning. I know where you live. So don't think that you have some kind of excuse. If you think, maybe I have a good reason to be unfaithful to Jesus. You don't. At least not in Jesus' opinion. So, third though, there's one last thing I want to show you. For Jesus to say, I know where you live, also gives us instruction. Should anybody give you advice about what to do in your life if they don't really understand your situation? Well, probably not. But the problem is what we just say. Nobody really fully understands another person's situation. So if I'm a pastor, how can I give you good counsel if I barely understand your situation in life? It's very hard. Let's be honest, it's really difficult. But we don't have that problem with Jesus. Jesus has a full understanding of your situation, and that means you had better listen to his instruction. And the whole book of Revelation is telling us what we need to do in our circumstances, in these very difficult circumstances. The whole book of Revelation is written for Pergamum. It's written for Ephesus and for Smyrna and Thyatira too, but it's written for Pergamum, and it's written for us as well, telling us what to do. And the main message of Revelation is this: stay faithful. Stay faithful. Stay faithful. Don't bail on Jesus. Don't renounce your faith in him. Don't give in. Don't bow down to an idol. Don't compromise with false teaching. Don't compromise with an idol. Don't compromise with sexual immorality, right? Stay a Christian. Stay a believer. Now, our deeds are important, as we've seen. We saw last week, Jesus says, I know your deeds. And that's describing a life that's devoted to others, a life that's devoted to God and to others. It's not deeds of ambition. I find the word deeds a little unfortunate. We hear Jesus saying, I know your deeds, and we as Christians should have good deeds. I think deeds, we tend to think of this like going out there and doing some spectacular thing, right? Some unusual good deed that we came up with. That's not really what's going on. It just means a life lived in service, humble service, loving God and loving other people. So here's a question for you, okay? A lot of us deal with this insecurity where we look at our lives and we're like, what kind of a life is this? Is it what you imagined your life was going to be? Well, probably not. It's probably different in all kinds of ways. Your life was probably smaller than you thought in all kinds of ways, difficult in all kinds of ways you didn't expect, frustrating and troubling in all kinds of ways you didn't expect, and you probably feel pretty bad for yourself a whole bunch of the time. But remember what Jesus says, I know where you live. And here's what I want to say. Do you believe in the Lord Jesus Christ? Do you know him through his gospel? Do you have part of you that loves him? And do you love the people of God? If so, then you don't need to have any kind of insecurity about what kind of life you got, because you got a good one. A wonderful, blessed life if you know Jesus and you love him and you love his people. Away with your insecurity about what kind of life it is. Sometimes we look at what's happening to us in our life, we say, man, what is it? I don't even know what all this is doing to me. We used to think that. We live in China, and just crazy stuff would happen to us. We'd be like, what is this doing to us? Like, we're going to need some serious therapy when all this is over. Like, we just felt like this is the strangest thing, very difficult circumstances, and you wonder, what is this even doing to me? Maybe this isn't good for me. I'll tell you what it's doing for you if you're faithful to Jesus right there in your life now. I don't mean some make-believe life you might have. I mean, you're faithful to Jesus in the life that you have right now, the life that you didn't choose, but the life that you have. It is filling your life with light, the light of the presence of God. Jesus is causing your life to be filled with the light of God's presence, and that means it's good. See what he says here at the end? Verse 17. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it. You're like, well, I don't really want any hidden manna, and I don't want a white stone with a name written on it nobody knows. Well, that's what Jesus is offering. We're not going to get into that too much. So let me just kind of shed a little bit of light on what that means. Those are ways of probably referring to a deeper, richer life lived in intimacy with God. A new level of knowledge of God. Jesus says, whoever's faithful in this church, those who remain faithful to me, what am I going to give them? I'm going to give them a life they can't even imagine. I'm going to give them a life that is filled with the knowledge of God. That's what he promises to give to his people. This wonderful story that J.I. Packer tells in his book, Knowing God. He says, I'll just read you the quote. He said, I walked one day with a scholar who had effectively forfeited his prospects of academic advancement by clashing with the powers that be over the gospel of grace. So in other words, he said, I was walking with this guy. J.I. Packer was an academic theologian kind of a guy. And he was walking one day with a colleague who, because of the stand he had taken on the gospel of grace, the gospel of Jesus Christ, he was in hot water, he made a bunch of enemies, and he was never going to advance in his career. Was never going to advance in his career in academia. This is what the guy said. But it doesn't matter, he said, for I've known God and they haven't. And friend, that's something you can say and you should bury deep down in your heart at the end of it. Whatever enemies you get along the way, whatever hardship comes your way, you can say, I've known God. I've known God through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And this world has not. And that's something the world can never take away from you. So what is it doing to you? It's giving you this reward. Jesus holds out this reward to his people. Last week we saw how he offered to Ephesus. He said, I will give you to eat of the tree of life. And here he says, I've got more. Every letter, Jesus, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you that. We see Jesus has his arms filled with good gifts to give to his people. And there's way more than just the 7 things in the 7 letters. It's just giving us a picture of this brand new, glorious life that Jesus intends to give to all of his people. And really, all of them point to a new creation. We'll see that at the end of the book. All of these new things. And what makes the new creation glorious? You say, well, I don't understand what's so great about a new heavens and a new earth. Well, here's what it is in a nutshell. New heavens and new earth is filled with the light of God. It is a world of light. And right now we're just these lights, this lampstand. We get little flashes of light, little glimpses of light. But the new creation, the new heavens and the new earth that's coming is a world that is filled with the light of the glorious presence of God. So friend, he says, I've got this white stone to give to you, and it's more precious than anything. And where you're at is good. It's good to live in Pergamum because that's where you get the white stone. It's good to live where you live because that's where you get the white stone. It's good to work where you work. That's where you get the white stone. It's good to be the mom at the home where you live. You're digging up that white stone. It's good to be a teacher at the school that you teach at. You're digging up the white stone there. That is the place where you're encountering the light, the presence of the glory of God. It's a good place, for it is the place that he's chosen to reward you. Now, it's a new year, so my calendar is reset, and I have a certain number of Charles Dickens illustrations that I can use in the new year. I'm trying to spend them wisely so I don't spend them all in January. So I'll just do one, and I'm not sure. You guys can get together and tell me how many I've got left after that. But in Dickens' novel Little Dorrit, which is one of my favorites, this main character named Amy Dorrit, she used to live in a debtor's prison. Back then, if you were in debt, you went to jail until you could pay your debt. It was a very complicated thing. Like, how are you ever going to pay your debt if you're in jail and you can't work to make any money to pay off your debt? But that was a real thing that happened. Charles Dickens himself, his own father was put in a debtor's prison when he was a kid. So very personal to him. He knew something about this. But he's writing this story about this family, the Dorrit family, and they're in the debtor's prison. And while they're in prison, there's this guy named Arthur who's very kind to her family, who gives them help, who's always visiting them and taking care of them. And eventually, the tables are turned, and Arthur, their family is released, and Arthur ends up in the debtor's prison. And little Dorrit, Amy, she comes to visit Arthur, this man that she's come to love because of the kindness that he's shown to her and to her family when their situation was reversed. And she sees him now in this impoverished state. His health is failing. He's gradually fading away. Their situations have been completely reversed. And now he's in debt, and he's perishing and languishing in this debtor's prison, and she has money now. She has a fortune, and she wants to use it to pay his debts. And he said, no, you can't. He's resistant, very noble guy. No, I won't let you use your money to pay to get me out of here. Listen to what she says, though. I have no use for money. I have no wish for it. It would be of no value at all to me, except for your sake. How could I be rich and you be here? Will you let me lend you all I have? Will you let me give it to you? Will you let me show you that I have never forgotten, that I never can forget your protection of me when this was my home? Make me of all the world the happiest by saying yes. For my sake, not for yours, for mine, for nobody's but mine. You will give me the greatest joy I can experience on earth, the joy of knowing that I have been serviceable to you and that I have paid some little of the great debt of my affection and gratitude. See how her feelings about that place are totally transformed by knowing that this person that she loves and cares about is there herself. And she says, why would I mind if everything I had was sunk into this hole? She said, why would I want it unless it was for you? And Christians, this needs to be our attitude about everything that we have in our life, everything that we might lose for the cause of Jesus Christ. Why would I want it? Why would I want it? Unless it was to be serviceable to you. Listen to what she says again. Make me of all the world the happiest by saying yes. Take this from me. When Jesus takes something from you, is that your attitude? It makes me the happiest in the world that Jesus would take something from me. Not for yours, for mine, for nobody's but mine. You'll give me the greatest joy I can experience on earth. The joy of knowing that I've been useful to you. Okay? Usually we should feel at that place where it's so difficult to be a Christian. Do you experience the joy of knowing that you've been useful to Jesus in some way? That you have paid, she says, some little of the great debt of our affection and gratitude to him. He knows where we live. We have instruction from him, encouragement from him, and a warning. Let's pray together.